Right on. Hey, we've got some guests with us this morning. Pastor Mac and Mina Dumpcombe are here, and they're longtime friends of this church. I appreciate them so much. So I'll invite Pastor Mac up, and he will bring us the word this morning.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Okay, that was terribly weak. Let's try that again. Good morning. Thank you. I did not drive all the way from Steinbeck to hear holy murmurs. It is so good. Every time we come here, it is so good. It's just like being home. And, I pray for you every single Sunday morning without fail. And I really prayed for you this morning because I knew who your speaker was. So let me get a scan of my crowd. How many of you here this morning, you have never heard me speak before? Can I hear your hands? Let me apologize in advance. It's not going to get any better than this. I'm sorry. I don't bite. I just look this way. And, there are people here that can tell you stories about me. They're all lying. But it's so good. And it's so good to have my wife. Oftentimes she doesn't get to come with me much because she works. And so Mina's here as well. And she was not with me in March when I was here. But she was very happy to be here this morning. So my Bible this morning is open to Mark chapter 5. And as we open there, let's pause a moment to bow before the King. Sovereign Lord, as we bow before your word this morning, we say, speak, because we are listening. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I'll be reading from the New English Translation. I'm looking at Mark chapter 5, verses 1 to 5 to begin with. It says, now they came to the other side of the lake to the region of the Gerasenes, and just as Jesus was getting out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came from the tombs and met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one can bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for his hands and feet had often been bound with chains and shackles, but he had torn the chains apart, broken the shackles in pieces. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Each night and every day among the tombs and in the mountains, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Now, you take a look at that, it's obvious that this brother's having more than just a bad day, right? It's not like you stub your toe in the middle of the night and get up like this, right? Or it's not like you get up in the morning and check your stocks and find out they're a little bit low and you end up like this. What we are seeing here is the far end of an extended process that began with one decision. I want to say that again because it's very important. What we are witnessing here in this man's condition is the far end of an extended process that all began with one decision. If you're taking notes, write this down. The whole spiritual world works on the principle of agreement. Please take note of that. The whole spiritual world works on the principle of agreement. You see, the devil cannot do anything in your life or in mine without our agreement. It's not like this devil just suddenly jumped on this guy and he turned out like this. It's not like he walked by a fortune teller's booth and something got off on him and he turned out like this. All right? The devil cannot do anything in your life or in mine without our agreement. And God prefers not to do anything in our life without our agreement. Now, the difference is God is sovereign. Some people, the way they talk, you would think that man's will is sovereign. Man's will is not sovereign. God is the only sovereign being in all of the universe. And there are times, if it suits His purpose and His glory, that He will circumvent the will of a person. And He will do His own thing. But it will always end up being to His glory and to our good when He does it. But He prefers to have our agreement. That's why right in the beginning, He put 2 trees in the Garden of Eden, and He gave us a choice, because love devoid of choice is meaningless. Obedience devoid of choice is meaningless. If there's only one choice, what do, right? So the devil cannot do anything without our agreement. God prefers not to do anything without our agreement. And at some point, this individual started making agreements. It all started with one decision, and each decision led to another. And each decision was a further step of submission to the voice suggesting the course of action. See, at some point there was a suggestion that came to this guy. It might have come through a friend. It might have come through an enemy. It might have just been a suggestion that suddenly presented itself to his mind. But at some point there was a suggestion made, and he said yes. And he followed that suggestion through to its completion. And then another suggestion was made, and he said yes to that one. And every time he said yes, it was easier to say yes the next time. And so it was a succession of yeses, constantly bowing himself into submission to whatever this was that was working in his life. And Jesus made this statement in John 8:34. He says, everyone who practices sin is a slave of sin. Now, that's Jesus that said that. And it's said many other times in the New Testament as well, that anything we give ourselves in obedience to eventually becomes our master. And so what we are seeing here is that repeated agreement and submission eventually led to a hostile takeover of his entire personality and life. Please hear that. Repeated submission, repeated agreement and submission eventually led to a hostile takeover of his entire personality and life. In other words, he continued to agree until all of a sudden he lost his power. All of a sudden he didn't have a choice anymore. All of a sudden that which he thought he was in control of, all of a sudden got in control of him. And he lost his power to choose because he'd already made the choice. And now he was completely subject to whatever this mess was. We're not told how he got here. We're just shown the far end of a process. And I mean, people tried to help him out. Now, we're not sure what all they tried to do. We have a little bit of a glimpse here. But you know how people are, and I mean, I've discovered that people are kind of the same in every age, you know. And I mean, I know what would happen if it was in our day. You know, we've got this successive process that we want to use in order to help people out because we're always trying to fix everybody. And of course, the first step is education, right? Now, I mean, this guy is in a mess. I mean, when it's to the point that you run around naked and screaming, you got problems, right? And I mean, so, you know, here's these people watching this guy fall completely apart among them. And I can imagine that some of the elders of the town got together and said, we got to do something about this. You know, maybe there's something he missed in his growing up. Maybe he doesn't know any better, so we got to educate him. So we'll call this guy Charlie just so we got a handle on him. So they finally corral Charlie, you know, however they do that, and say, bro, you know, this is not good. You know, we've got women here and we've got children here, and dude, they are totally traumatized by this. This is not socially acceptable behavior. I don't know if anybody ever told you that. This is not the way we do in polite society. Now, how are you going to rationalize with somebody who's out of control? There is nothing rational about what's going on here, and there is no rationale that you are going to present that's going to make this any better, okay? The intent might be very good, and it might be a very valiant effort, but a rational set of facts cannot guarantee a rational outcome. I mean, education is always the first thing that we default to whenever something goes wrong in our society. We just need to educate people more. If we can make them smarter, we'll make them better. We can all see how well that has worked, right? So all we got is a bunch of smart law violators, right? And that's our next step. If education doesn't work, then we default to legislation. I tell them what we're going to do. We are going to make a law. So all the elders gathered up at the gates of the town where they used to transact business, and they said, you know, we got to do something about this. So I say that we pass a city ordinance that it is against the law to do what he's doing, to run around like that. Who's all in favor? Yep. So they make all these laws, right? It's absolutely against the law to run around naked and screaming. So finally they take the city ordinance, you know, they got that all written up there and all signed, and they say, now Charlie, you know, brother, we tried to reason with you. You weren't being reasonable, so now it is now illegal for you to do this. You cannot do this anymore, or there's going to be some kind of repercussion. This brother is under the influence of the ultimate lawless ones, and you're going to pass a law to make it better? We can't even do that with sane people. Drive down the highway. Everybody thinks those numbers on those signs are suggestions. And stop signs, everybody thinks that sign reads pause. Or at least stop if somebody's coming, which is kind of the ultimate no-brainer. But we're going to pass a law and make this guy better. Right. Go right ahead. That don't mean nothing to him. Doesn't mean nothing to us. Why should it mean anything to him? Right? Okay, so education didn't work. Legislation didn't work, so now what happens when you violate the law? We got a place called jail that we put people. So now you're going to put him in jail. So that we know that they actually tried to do that. They tried to corral him. They tried to handcuff him. They tried to put him in manacles, you know, leg irons, maybe the stocks. I don't know what all they had back then. They're going to tie him up, right? They're going to tie him up. They're going to get control of him this way. Well, folks, the problem is this guy is under the influence of a superior spiritual power. He is not running on his own energy. He is running on the energy of something that is far greater than anything these folks have ever encountered. So yeah, they snap the irons on him, they tie him up, and he just pops those things apart and just keeps right on doing what he's doing. So their most valiant, heroic efforts here are failing them. There's nothing that they can seem to do. Now, of course, if it was in our modern day, they would have tried medication maybe next. They didn't have all the access to that kind of stuff like we do. And I mean, medication can certainly suppress a person's behavior, but it doesn't set them free. It just curbs the behavior and may make it a little bit better. But they, like I say, they didn't have that. So you know what they finally ended up with? Education didn't work. Legislation didn't work. Incarceration didn't work. So the only thing left is resignation. They just threw up their hands and said, we quit. There is absolutely nothing we can do. So they literally give up all hope of finding a solution. I guess this is just the way he's going to be. So maybe if he stays out there in the tombs, and maybe if he doesn't hurt anybody, just don't go out there. Just tell everybody else, don't go out there. Just go around some other way. Just leave him out there, and I guess this is just going to be the way it is. So this guy is utterly hopeless. There is no help for him at this point. Everything people have tried has failed. He's got himself in a mess, and everybody's just thrown their hands up and has literally given up on him because there is nothing else that they can do. Until one day, something different happens. And we read that here in Mark 5. We already read it in verses 1 and 2, but then I want to continue on through verses 6 to 13. Verses 1 and 2, it says, so they came to the other side of the lake. Now, this is Jesus and his team they're talking about here. It says, so they came to the other side of the lake, to the region of Gennesaret, and just as Jesus was getting out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came from the tombs and met him. Down on to verse 6. It says, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. Then he cried out with a loud voice, leave me alone, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. I implore you by God, do not torment me. For Jesus had said to him, come out of that man, you unclean spirit. And Jesus asked him, what is your name? And he says, my name is Legion, for we are many. He begged Jesus repeatedly not to send them out of the region. There on the hillside was a great herd of pigs feeding, and the demonic spirits begged him, send us into the pigs, let us enter them. And Jesus gave them permission, so the unclean spirits came out and went into the pigs, and then the whole herd rushed down the steep slope into the lake, and about 2,000 were drowned in the lake. So, here's this man out here all in this mess, given up by his family, his friends. He's just going to be like this, and then one day this little boat parks up on the shore of the other side of the Lake Gennesaret there. Or Gennesaret is the technical term. And Jesus and his disciples get out. Now, the thing that you got to know here, and my wife will tell you, I've got an incredibly vivid imagination, and I live through these stories. And I think about this. These guys, you got to remember, if you read back up into chapter 4, just before you get into chapter 5, as they launched out to cross the lake to the other side, anybody know what happened? What happened when they got on that lake? This side here is just all failed. What happened when they got out there on that lake? Anybody know? A storm. Thank you. Who said that? You're like my new favorite person, right? All of a sudden, this storm came, and they're going to the bottom because, that boat wasn't but about 2 feet high, and they were going to the bottom, and so they're in the midst of this storm. Jesus stands up, calms the storm, blows these guys' minds. They're wondering who in the world we're dealing with here. And now they have parked on the other side of this lake. Now you notice there in Mark's account, it says that Jesus got out of the boat. I don't know what the rest of the disciples were doing, especially when old crazy Charlie comes charging down the beach. And you got to have a lot of sympathy for these disciples because they were just people like you and me. Most of them were very young, not these old men that our artists so often depict. They were maybe in their late 20s, early 30s at the best. And they were just people, just like you and me. And they had already seen a lot of wild stuff, but this was probably too wild for most of them. And I can imagine that once that dude came charging down that beach, the rest of them were heading back to the boat as fast as they could go. I did not sign up for this. Screaming out loud in church is one thing, but naked and screaming on the beach, I did not sign up for. I'm out of here. Right? But Jesus never even flinched because he knew who was in charge. And I want you to notice the reaction of this man when he met Jesus. We see it there in verses 6 to 8. He immediately ran up and he fell down at Jesus' feet. Now you got to remember, this guy is not in control of himself. He is being animated by these beings that have taken over his life. And so it's actually these beings that are propelling him forward and falling at the feet of Jesus. It says that they bowed down, which is the response of a subordinate to a superior. They recognize that this guy standing on the beach who just got out of that boat is in charge of everything that is about to happen here. And they immediately cry out and they start begging for Jesus to leave them alone, because they call him Son of the Most High God. They fully recognize who they are dealing with. And they beg him. And it's interesting. He says, I beg you by God not to torment me. As I was reading that, I thought, even the demons get religious in the presence of Jesus. Because they recognize right at this moment that their fate is in his hands. Whatever he says, the next words out of his mouth is going to determine what's going to happen next. And Jesus asked what their name was, says it was Legion, because there was many. We don't know exactly how many, but a legion of Roman soldiers is 6,000. So if that's any indication, this boy was in a big mess. And so they see this herd of pigs off on the side of the hill there, and they say, let's go over there, let us go over there. And they recognize they cannot do anything without Jesus giving them permission. And so they start begging, let us go over there, we'll go over there to the pigs, let's go to the pigs. And so Jesus says, go. And immediately they leave. And immediately all the pigs end up in the lake. It was not a pretty sight. Can you imagine? But I want you to notice what happened here. The demons had completely destroyed this man's life. Spiritually, he was under the influence of a hostile personality that cared nothing about him and was absolutely bent on his destruction. Socially, he was cut off from absolutely everything that he had cared about. Having completely lost his mind, his will, and his emotion, these demons had completely destroyed this man. But look what happened to the pigs when these demons entered the pigs. They completely destroyed them as well. And that's because demons destroy everything they touch. They have no life-giving power. They have no redemptive power. Everything they do is destructive. I don't care what they promise you. You are going to be destroyed if you get in league with them. It's that plain, that simple. But notice Jesus. With just one word, Jesus Christ sets this man free and totally restores him. In just a few verses, the town folk come out to see what in the world has happened, because all the pig herders, now they're the ones booking it back to town to say, what happened out there. And they all come out to see, and here's this guy sitting there clothed, in his right mind, conversing with Jesus and his disciples, who are probably now back out of the boat. Right? Everything turns around in the presence of this King, who holds absolute authority, who holds absolute power over everything, and whose power is always redemptive. Because whenever you come into contact with Jesus Christ, everything gets turned right side up and set the way it is supposed to be. And I know that for a fact because 47 years ago, last Sunday, July the 24th, My Jesus met a 15-year-old boy at 315 West Fifth Street in Hugoton, Kansas, whose life was so messed up. Now, it wasn't anything like this, I can guarantee you. But his life was so upside down, it was ridiculous. And at 11:20 in the morning, in the living room of my home, my Jesus came in and set my upside down life right side up. And 47 years later, he's better than he's ever been. He's sweeter than he's ever been. He's more powerful than he's ever been. Not that he's changed, but I know more now. I can access more now, because that's what spiritual growth is all about, is getting your life more open to Jesus than it has ever been. And if there is anything this world needs in our day, it is a living encounter with the living Christ. They don't need our programs. They don't need our sermons. They don't need our songs. As wonderful as all that is, they need our Jesus. They need a living encounter with Christ. And if what you and I are doing is not leading them to that encounter, we're wasting our time. Just one encounter with Jesus Christ turned this whole life around. So many of you sitting here this morning, you got that same testimony. My religion was failing me. In fact, my religion was killing me. But Jesus Christ made all the difference. And that's what makes all the difference for anybody. So you know what? This story here should give us a lot of hope. I mean, it is hard to imagine a life more messed up than this one. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than this. So that tells me that no matter what you are facing here this morning, no matter how messy it is, no matter how troubling it is, one encounter with the living Christ can change everything. I don't care how bad your sickness. I don't care how bad your torment. There's somebody here this morning, you've been tormented lately by dreams. Dreams have been paralyzing you in your sleep to the point that you're afraid to go to sleep at some time. I want to pray for you before you get out of here this morning, because Jesus wants to set you free of that. All right? Whoever that might be. There's somebody else here that you've been struggling with migraine headaches. There's somebody that you probably need to forgive, and that's fine, but Jesus wants to set you free of those migraine headaches, so we want to pray for you before you get out of here this morning. And I don't care what it is, and I don't care whether I call it out or not. Jesus is calling you today. Brother Abe says there are several people here that he had on his heart. We'd like to pray for you before you get out of here today, because just one encounter with Jesus Christ, it's not encountering me. It's not encountering Abe or Irwin. It's encountering Jesus. That makes all the difference. It doesn't matter who prays for you, who doesn't pray for you. It's making it to Jesus. One little woman come up behind him and got a hold of his garment, and that was enough. It's all about Jesus. So this morning, I don't care what your need is. Jesus Christ is your answer. One encounter with Jesus makes all the difference. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it.